This video is about my first year and a half working in the tech industry. If you're new to tech, or if you're considering going to boot camp, or just considering transitioning into the tech industry, I'm going to talk about the top things that I've learned, my experiences, and this is from the perspective of someone who was brand new to tech and somebody who had no experience in the corporate world. So first of all, as you might know, I went to a coding bootcamp for data science in 2019. I started my career in tech in that same year, later in the fall. And it was very challenging at first. I've learned a lot of things, and I'm still learning loads of things. I don't think that I am anywhere near to being comfortable or close to my goals, but I just wanted to share some of the major things that were really surprising to me when I first started working in this field. So first of all, it's the difference between being a contractor and a full-time employee. In the tech industry, companies tend to use contractors very often because of a gap in the available skilled workers or workers who are just technically skilled. So contractors fill a demand for these skilled workers, which is why I think more people should go to coding boot camps to learn these valuable skills. But being a contractor is kind of strange. I'll talk about the pros and cons, but there's also this law that's involved in this situation, because I don't know what it's called exactly, but there's a law that says that a company can only hire a contractor for a maximum of 2 years. At that point, they have to let the contractor go or convert them into a full-time employee. So I was dealing with that. My first job was a temporary kind of contract job. My second and third jobs, I was also a contractor, just at a different company. And then finally, I was able to be converted into a full-time employee. Now, in my experience, this whole thing of being hired as a contractor was a big surprise, because what I was expecting after boot camp was doing interviews and then getting a really great offer and then getting multiple job offers from different companies, and then I dreamed and hoped that I would be able to use these multiple job offers to negotiate a really great salary. But of course, it did not work out like that. What happened was that I was able to find a short-term job, and then at this larger company, I was offered a contractor position. So that was surprising, and I had to learn all what being a contractor was about, because I had no idea really. And of course, at the time, I didn't really care. It didn't keep me from accepting the offer. I was very happy, and I said yes, and people told me that it was a good way for me to get my foot into the door. And I think that's true. So what I've realized and learned over the past year and a half is that this scenario where a company hires somebody as a contractor, it's sometimes called contract to hire. It's very frequently used in the tech industry, not only for the reason that I described before, there being a huge gap in available skilled workers, but also because it can sometimes end up being a trial period, which is kind of messed up. I think contract to hire, it allows a company to have less risk involved in hiring someone, because if it doesn't work out, they could just let the person go. If you're interested in getting into the tech field, I think it's very important to understand this. Now, for the pros and cons. The pros about being a contractor is that, in my experience, I've seen that if you're a contractor, you can get a higher hourly pay rate. Secondly, you have a bit more freedom in the time you could take off of work. Of course, it's it's unpaid time off, but you still have a bit more freedom because you're not tied down to a set number of PTO days. So you have a bit more freedom in your scheduling and your time off, but you don't have the luxury, of course, of PTO. The last pro about being a contractor is that you do have the flexibility and freedom to leave a company. It's not like you're tied down and you don't feel weighed down by the responsibilities of being stuck there, kind of. The downsides, the negatives, are of course that you have less benefits than a full-time employee, and that's why subsequently you typically have a higher hourly pay rate, because you're not getting all the great benefits that a full-time employee might. For example, like education benefits, retirement, pension, or things like that. The other downside to being a contractor is that you can sometimes feel as though you're not valued as much because you are excluded from certain things that only employees are included in. So I think there's this division. It also feels like that because oftentimes contractors are foreigners, people from India, China, other Asian countries, other African countries. So that contributes to this feeling of a divide between contractors and full-time employees, and I definitely felt that. But the biggest thing that's a downside is that if you're a contractor and you are told that you're being hired, contract to hire, there's this constant looming anxiety that you might be let go and that you have to perform really well in order to be converted into a full-time employee. So that is definitely what I experienced. There was this constant anxiety and uncertainty about whether or not I would be converted. And it really sucked because I had so much depending on this job and this security. So it kind of sucked. I also didn't have the greatest boss who was very bad at communicating and couldn't give me a straight answer about when I would get converted to a full-time employee. But of course, luckily I got changed to a different team. And luckily I found an amazing boss and I was converted to a full-time employee, I think about maybe 8 months after I initially started as a contractor. So that was great. It was good for me in the end. The people who told me to take it, the opportunity, were definitely right because I was able to find the position I wanted in this very large company. When I was a contractor, I was making $45 an hour, and then when I got converted to a full-time employee, that went down to about 30-something, like $35 an hour. But of course, I get all these great benefits as well. So there's also pros and cons to being a full-time employee as well, if you really think about it. The pros are that you do get these great benefits, like I mentioned. You also have security and stability, but I've noticed or I've experienced that that can sometimes lead to laziness or complacency. It just depends on maybe the person, or it's a generational thing, or it can really just depend on where you work. Some of the cons about being a full-time employee are also, like I mentioned, you can kind of feel really tied down. You can feel, depending on where you work, a bit like you're trapped, or like, you feel like you're stuck in a way, or at least there's a potential that that can happen if you're not kind of developing yourself or like working towards your goals, or if you avoid being complacent and lazy. Also, the other con about being a full-time employee is that I believe you do kind of get more responsibilities. There's kind of an expectation that's different when you're a contractor. You do have more responsibilities, and it's kind of like the company kind of owns you now because you are a full-time employee. And I think that can depend, again, on where you work, but overall, I think there's more of an expectation There's more requirements involved. There's certain compliance things, certain benchmark things that you need to do. So you do have to perform, and there's, I believe, more responsibility when you are a full-time employee. But really depends on who you are, where you work. I don't see those as cons necessarily. But just kind of comparing what it's like to be a contractor versus a full-time employee, this has been my experience so far. Now, the next thing that I've learned my first year and a half, I knew nothing about Agile methodologies when I first started. And this is because, I just went to a coding boot camp. I had no technical experience or knowledge beforehand. And what these are basically are just methods and philosophies and ways to manage workloads across large teams who are developing software or just technical skills. It can depend. They can be applied to many different things as well. My first 3 jobs were not Agile, so I didn't have to learn much until my current job. My current job does follow Agile methodologies, so it was a bit of a struggle to learn at first, and sometimes I still feel as though I really don't know what's going on, but I do consider myself a very organized person, so it hasn't been too hard to figure it out and follow along. But it might be a surprise if you don't know anything about the technical field or the industry. There are loads of different workload management philosophies and structures. So if you are trying to get into tech, don't worry about it too much, because there are so many different types of ways to do it at different companies. So I don't think you should expect to master this if you're really trying to get ahead. It would be good to maybe research some basic concepts to get a kind of general idea about what it is, but don't stress about complete mastery in the beginning. In my experience, this not knowing anything about Agile methodologies definitely contributed a bit to feeling like an imposter. But like I said, I was able to learn, and people on my team, people around me, all the people involved in the kind of structure have been very helpful, and I think you'll find that most people are helpful and able to guide you in how to follow the methodologies. It's also like a big compliance thing, so you have to learn and have to know how to do it right. But it's a relatively easy thing to do. The last thing that I learned about in my first year and a half was all about office politics. I feel like this really has to do more about working in a corporate workplace than in a different medium or small-sized workplace, although office politics still apply there. But what I experienced is that I started working in a very huge corporate environment, and it was very isolating, scary, and unappealing at first. I struggled with feeling comfortable, and again, I never had a corporate job before. It was so weird and just felt so forced and sterile and PC all the time. So I really struggled with that at first. The worst thing that can happen in this type of environment is that you get stuck with a boss or coworkers who are toxic. And I definitely experienced that in one of my first positions, but because I was able to network and utilize resources around me very well, I was able to find other teams. I was able to transfer to those other teams and work with really amazing people now. So the biggest lesson is that, the people you work with are the foundation and rock and will color your experience at a workplace. So learning how to have and exercise really great networking skills is really, really crucial and really important. I feel like I was able to learn a lot of that as an artist when I went to graduate school. And so I was able to exercise networking a lot. So in the beginning, this meant just finding people sending them a cold email, just like, hey, I'm new here, would you like to have lunch? So I met a few people like that at first, which was really great. Secondly, what I did was I found groups like user groups or interest groups at my workplace. One of them was a data visualization user group, and that was great because I was able to find like-minded people. And then next thing that I did in terms of networking is I emailed a bunch of data scientists and I talked to them about their position, their experience, their skills. And this was great because it helped me learn about what was necessary in order to get that position, because that's ultimately my longer term career plan and goal. So this was all helpful in helping me find people that I aspire to become, people that can mentor me, just like-minded people. When I first started, it felt very isolating and very lonely and scary. So using your networking skills to find people in a large workplace when you're brand new is really, really important. The other thing about office politics is that, being PC or like professional is easy. It's relatively easy. But what I found is that when I was working in this very large corporate environment, I felt sometimes as though I was alone, like there was nobody telling me what to do. I think on the one hand, this can feel very isolating and lonely and maybe even depressing. However, over time, I've been able to feel and flip this around in a way so that it feels not so much that I'm like alone, but more so like I have autonomy and control over the work that I do. So I think that it's important to think about it in this way. Think about the control and autonomy that you have in your own work. If you're in a very large workplace environment that feels this way, so on the one hand, it could feel as though like there's like nobody helping me. I feel alone. I can't relate to anybody around me, which is definitely what I felt at the beginning. But on the flip side, it could feel as though you don't have anyone like looking over your shoulder all the time. You could feel as though you have autonomy and control over your work and over your schedule to some extent. And it could also feel as though you're, driving your goals and your purpose in your work. So this has been my experience in a corporate workplace environment. There were ups and downs. In the beginning, it was definitely a huge challenge. Luckily, I was able to find people. I was able to find a new team, and then I was able to finally get converted to a full-time employee, which drastically changed my level of anxiety and worry, of course. So all in all, I feel like, I did all the correct things in order to get to where I am right now. And I feel very happy, of course. I'm working at home, obviously, and it's been good, but I just wanted to share all these challenges and these lessons so that if you're thinking about entering this field, it might help you get a better perspective about what it actually is like to work in a company. Again, I want to emphasize the importance of networking. Networking is definitely the biggest skill that you need. You need to be able to harness the resources around you, specifically the people around you. If you work with good people, I believe you can survive and really thrive in any job. So that's what I recommend. Also, do a bit of research about the big general concept of what Agile methodologies or different types of workload management methodologies are. Lastly, just be aware that if you're trying to get into the tech field, you might not get that coveted job offer. You might have to work as a contractor first for a while to kind of prove yourself. But hopefully what I shared with you is going to be helpful. Okay. I think that's it. Peace, bet.